I have more pressing concerns than my physical comfort, he said, such as the Brotherhood agents who came searching for you after the soldiers withdrew. Alexander's expression hardened. You've encountered them before. Not personally, Lucas clarified, but Mikhail's journals contained extensive references to them. He believed they were the true power behind the village's attempt to execute you 30 years ago, that they manipulated local superstitions to serve their ends. This was unexpected information. Alexander had always attributed his near destruction to village paranoia and religious zealotry, not calculated external influence. If the Brotherhood had been involved even then, did Mikhail explain why they targeted me specifically? He asked. Lucas moved to one of the stone sarcophagi and sat, clearly still suffering from his earlier ordeal despite his attempts to hide it. He came to believe they wanted to prevent you from finding the Codex, that they knew what you were and why you had come to Ravenwood. The priest's steady gaze met Alexander, just as they knew you would eventually return. A chill that had nothing to do with the crypt's physical temperature settled over Alexander. You're suggesting I was manipulated, that my presence here, now, was anticipated, even planned for? Mikhail's final journal entries become increasingly paranoid, but he was convinced the Brotherhood plays a long game, spanning decades or even centuries, Lucas explained. He believed they allowed knowledge of the Codex's location to reach certain vampiric circles deliberately, knowing it would eventually draw someone of your particular talents. To what end? Alexander demanded, his mind racing through implications. If they wished to destroy me, there are far simpler methods. Not destruction, Lucas corrected, manipulation. Mikhail believed they needed a vampire of significant age and power for some greater purpose, something connected to the Codex itself. He hesitated, then added, something that required your specific bloodline. This last detail sent a jolt of genuine alarm through Alexander. His bloodline was indeed unusual. He was neither a made vampire nor a direct descendant of the original progenitors, but something rarer, a natural mutation that occurred perhaps once in 10 millennia. Born human, but transforming spontaneously in his third decade of life. The Covenant kept his true nature secret from all but its highest echelons, recognizing both his value and the danger his existence posed to established hierarchies. How could Mikhail have known that? He asked quietly. How could the Brotherhood know? The Codex, Lucas replied simply. According to Mikhail's notes, it contains detailed genealogies of supernatural bloodlines, including markers to identify rare variants like yourself. Alexander's mind worked rapidly, connecting disparate pieces of information into a troubling new picture. If the Brotherhood had indeed engineered his arrival in Ravenwood 30 years ago and anticipated his return now, then everything that had transpired, from Voss's expedition to Elena's involvement to the villagers' peril, might be components of a more elaborate strategy. Where are these journals now? He asked. Hidden, Lucas answered. After the Brotherhood's agents questioned me about you and the Codex, I realized their historical significance. I secured them in a location known only to me. His expression grew grave. They mentioned a ritual, Alexander. Something requiring the Codex, a specific location, and the blood of a vampire of your particular lineage. They seemed eager when they realized you had returned to Ravenwood. The implications were deeply troubling. Alexander had assumed he was pursuing the Brotherhood. The possibility that they were instead luring him into a prepared scenario reversed the dynamics of the hunt entirely. I need to see these journals, he decided. And you need to leave Ravenwood immediately. If the Brotherhood knows of your connection to Mikhail's research, your life is in danger. Lucas made no move to rise. My place is here, with my congregation. I will not abandon them when danger threatens." "Your courage is admirable, but misplaced," Alexander countered. "The Brotherhood does not hesitate to eliminate those who interfere with their plans, regardless of religious standing or moral character." "All the more reason for me to remain," Lucas insisted. "The villagers trust me. They will listen to warnings coming from me when they might dismiss them from others." Alexander recognized the futility of arguing further. The priest possessed the same stubborn conviction that had made his predecessor both admirable and dangerous. Rather than waste time on a debate he was unlikely to win, he changed tack. "The journals, then," he pressed. "Where are they hidden?" Lucas hesitated, then reached beneath his robes to produce a small iron key. In Mikhail's personal vault, concealed behind the altar in the main sanctuary. "This opens the lock." He held out the key. "But I warn you, some of what he recorded in his final years strains credibility. The ravings of a man consumed by guilt, perhaps, or genuine insights into matters beyond mortal understanding. I cannot say which." Alexander accepted the key, its weight seemingly disproportionate to its size. "I need to secure the codex first," he said. "The tunnels beneath the church extend farther than those currently mapped. There's a section dating to pre-Christian times that should serve as a temporary hiding place." "You trust me with this knowledge?" Lucas asked, surprised. "I judge character quickly, by necessity," Alexander replied. "You could have revealed everything to Voss or the Brotherhood, yet you chose otherwise. That earns you a measure of provisional trust." The priest nodded, acknowledging the limited but significant vote of confidence. What will you do after retrieving Mikhail's journals? Locate the Brotherhood's chapter house and determine the extent of their knowledge and capabilities, Alexander answered, already moving toward the deeper passages of the crypt. "If they're truly conducting some ritual involving the Codex and my bloodline, the danger extends far beyond Ravenwood or even the Covenant." "And the villagers?" Lucas called after him. "Will you abandon them to whatever fate the Brotherhood has planned?" Alexander paused, the question striking that same uncomfortable chord it had earlier with Liliana. Why should the fate of these people matter to him? They had tried to destroy him once, and would likely do so again if they knew his true nature. Pragmatism dictated focusing solely on the strategic threats, the Codex, the Brotherhood, the ritual they apparently planned. Yet something had shifted within him since his return to Ravenwood. Perhaps it was Elena's quiet courage, or Lucas's principled stand despite knowing what Alexander was. Perhaps it was the faces of the villagers in the square, terrified but dignified as they faced execution for crimes they hadn't committed, a dark reflection of his own experience decades earlier. "The Brotherhood appears fixated on me specifically," he said finally. "Once I draw their attention away from Ravenwood, the immediate danger to the villagers should pass." Even as he spoke, he recognized the rationalization for what it was, a convenient alignment of strategic necessity with an impulse he was reluctant to acknowledge. Lucas seemed to hear the uncertainty beneath his words. "And if you're wrong? If we are all pieces in their larger game? Then I will deal with that contingency when it arises," Alexander replied, with finality, disappearing into the shadowed passage. The tunnels beneath the church extended far deeper than even Elena or Lucas realized, reaching ancient constructions that predated Christianity's arrival in the region. Alexander moved confidently through the darkness, guided by senses that had evolved over centuries to navigate such spaces. The smell of damp earth and ancient stone grew stronger as he descended, until finally he reached a small chamber whose walls bore markings similar to those he had observed earlier, symbols of a civilization long forgotten by humans but remembered in vampire lore. This chamber, unknown to Ravenwood's current inhabitants, had once been a place of power, a nexus where cosmic energies converged for reasons lost to time. It was the perfect place to temporarily conceal the Codex, as the ambient energies would mask the book's own unique metaphysical signature from those who might have means to track it. Carefully, Alexander placed the codex in a small alcove high in the chamber wall, then used his preternatural strength to shift a section of stone to conceal it. The book would remain secure here until he determined the full extent of the Brotherhood's plans and neutralize any immediate threats. With that task completed, he retraced his steps through the tunnels, returning to the main crypt where Lucas still waited, leaning heavily against the sarcophagus. The priest's resilience was impressive for a mortal, but even determination had its limits. "You should rest," Alexander advised again. "The Brotherhood is unlikely to move openly before dawn." "I'll rest when the village is secure," Lucas replied stubbornly. "Mikhail's journals are in the sanctuary vault. They may contain information critical to understanding what the Brotherhood intends." Recognizing the futility of further argument, Alexander nodded. "Lead on, then." They ascended through the crypt to the main church sanctuary, where moonlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the simple wooden pews. The altar stood at the far end, a modest stone structure draped with white cloth embroidered with religious symbols. Lucas moved behind it, motioning for Alexander to join him. "The vault is accessed here," he explained, pressing against a particular stone in the wall behind the altar. With a soft click, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a small chamber beyond. "Mikhail's private sanctum," Lucas said, a note of reverence in his voice despite his obvious exhaustion. Few knew of its existence even during his lifetime. The hidden room was barely large enough for two people to stand comfortably. Its walls were lined with shelves containing books, scrolls, and various religious artifacts. A small desk occupied one corner, its surface covered with papers yellowed with age. Lucas crossed to a metal box on the lowest shelf, inserting the key he had given Alexander earlier. "His final journals are within," he said, turning the key with visible effort. "The record of his descent into either madness or profound insight." The box opened with a protesting creak, revealing several leather-bound volumes. Lucas extracted 3, placing them on the desk. "These cover the period from your execution to his death 15 years later," he explained. "They begin as conventional accounts of parish business, but gradually shift to increasingly disturbing observations and theories." Alexander moved to examine the journals, his enhanced vision easily reading the faded ink despite the dim light. The earliest entries were indeed mundane, records of baptisms, marriages, deaths, and seasonal observations typical of a rural priest's chronicles. But as he quickly skimmed forward, the tone changed dramatically. April 17, 1865. "I dream of the burning again." The stranger's eyes as the flames caught his clothes. Not fear, not pain, but surprise, as if he had not believed us capable of such action. And behind that, something older, a recognition. He knew me, somehow, not as myself, but as something I represent. I wake drenched in sweat, the smell of burning flesh lingering, though 5 years have passed. June 3, 1865. The men came again today. They ask always the same questions: whether any strangers have visited, whether there have been unusual deaths or disappearances, whether the sealed crypt remains secure. They call themselves Imperial agents, but their medallions bear the symbol I now recognize: the eternal flame devouring what appears to be a bat or winged creature. They believe I do not notice, but my eyes are opened now. As Alexander continued reading, the entries grew increasingly disturbed, documenting Mikhail's gradual realization that he had been manipulated by forces beyond his understanding, that his religious fervor had been weaponized by the Brotherhood to accomplish their own ends. December 25, 1866. Christmas should bring joy, yet I find only deepening horror. I have confirmed through old church records that similar witch burnings occurred here in 1662, 1763, and now 1860, each time targeting a stranger who sought access to the church crypt. The pattern repeats approximately every century. How could I have been so blind? We were puppets dancing on strings we could not see. March 19, 1867. I have broken the seal on the forbidden vault beneath the altar. God forgive me, but I must know what they protect so assiduously. The book within, the Codex Sanguinis, is not what I expected. Not a grimoire of dark magic, but a scholarly compilation. Its Latin passages document bloodlines of creatures that walk as men, but are something other. Vampire, Nosferatu, the Undying. Different names for the same phenomenon. And among these bloodlines, one is marked with special attention. The evolved, those not made but born to their condition. Rarest of the rare. Was the stranger such a being? Is that why they needed him to burn here specifically? The entries continued in this vein, documenting Mikhail's increasingly obsessive research into vampire lore, the history of Ravenwood, and the symbolic significance of its church. The final journal contained the most disturbing revelations. January 3rd, 1875. At last I understand. The church stands upon a nexus, a confluence of energies the ancients recognized and built their temple upon. The Christians came later, building their church over the pagan foundation, unaware of its significance. The Brotherhood knows, has always known. The ritual they prepare requires 3 elements: the codex, containing the spell and genealogies, the blood of an evolved, willingly shed at the nexus, and the precise celestial alignment that occurs once every century when the blood moon rises in Taurus. The next such alignment comes in 1890. They burned the vampire in 1860 to consecrate the ground with his pain and rage, preparing for the main ritual 30 years later. But he escaped somehow, his body never found among the ashes. Their plans disrupted, they will try again when the stars align once more. God help us all when they do. October 15th, 1875. They know I have discovered their purpose. Strange men watch the church day and night. The villagers think me mad now, my warnings about the Brotherhood dismissed as paranoid ravings. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps my guilt over the stranger's burning has unhinged my mind. But I know what I have read in the Codex, what I have pieced together from church records spanning centuries. The Brotherhood seeks to open a door, a passage between worlds that would allow entities of immense power to enter our realm, entities that would grant them dominion over life and death itself. The Evolve's blood is the key that unlocks this door, and Ravenwood, my peaceful, ignorant village, is where the veil between worlds is thinnest. Alexander closed the journal, his mind racing. If Mikhail's research was accurate, the implications were staggering. The Brotherhood wasn't simply hunting supernatural beings out of religious fervor or fear. They were working toward a specific apocalyptic goal, one that required his particular bloodline. And if the celestial alignment Mikhail mentioned followed the same 100-year cycle, when is the next blood moon? He asked Lucas abruptly. The priest looked startled by the sudden question. 3 nights from now, he replied. The autumn equinox brings a full lunar eclipse this year. The villagers have planned a harvest festival to coincide with it. 3 nights. The Brotherhood had engineered his return to Ravenwood with uncanny precision, manipulating events to ensure he would be present for the very astronomical alignment their ritual. The attack on Elena, the Imperial soldiers, Voss's hunt for the Codex, all were likely components of a strategy designed to maneuver him exactly where they wanted him. But to what purpose? Mikhail's journal suggested a doorway between worlds, entities of immense power, claims that would strain credulity even among the Covenant, which had existed for millennia and catalogued countless supernatural phenomena. "We need to leave, Alexander," said Alexander decisively. "You, Elena, any others who have directly interacted with me. The Brotherhood will use you as leverage to secure my cooperation." Lucas shook his head. "I told you before, I will not abandon my congregation." "Your congregation will be safer without your presence," Alexander countered. "The Brotherhood wants me and the Codex. If they cannot locate either, they will target those they believe can lead them to us." Before Lucas could respond, the church door burst open. Both men turned to see a figure silhouetted against the night sky, a woman's form moving with inhuman grace and speed. Liliana. Her usual composure was noticeably absent as she approached, her eyes reflecting a concern Alexander had rarely witnessed in their centuries of acquaintance. "We have a significant problem," she announced without preamble. "The Brotherhood has taken Elena." Alexander's blood ran cold. "Impossible! You were supposed to protect her." "I did," Liliana snapped, "until a dozen Brotherhood agents armed with weapons specifically designed to incapacitate our kind surrounded the cottage. They used some sort of alchemical compound, a gas that affects vampire physiology. I was unconscious for only minutes, but it was enough." Her expression darkened. "They left this for you." She handed Alexander a folded piece of parchment sealed with red wax, bearing the impression of a flame consuming a winged creature, the Brotherhood's emblem. Breaking the seal, he read the message within, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Alexander Volkov, your presence in Ravenwood is no coincidence, as you have doubtless begun to realize. The wheels set in motion a century ago turn now towards their inevitable conclusion. Your blood, the Codex, and the nexus beneath Ravenwood's church, together they will open the way for our ascension. Bring the Codex to the stone circle in the forest beyond the village's northern boundary at midnight on the blood moon. Come alone. In exchange for your cooperation, the old woman will be released unharmed. Refuse, and her death will be but the first of many. The choice, as always, remains yours. But know this, what was begun in fire 30 years ago will end in fire now. The only question is, how many will burn with you? Sebastian Crane, Grand Master, Brotherhood of the Eternal Flame." "Sebastian Crane," Alexander murmured. "So he does still live." "Who is this Sebastian Crane?" Lucas asked, looking between the two vampires with growing concern. "A hunter," Liliana answered before Alexander could speak. "One of the most dangerous humans to ever threaten our kind. He should have died a century ago, yet somehow persists." Her gaze shifted to Alexander. "We need to report this to the Covenant immediately. This goes beyond a local threat or a single missing artifact. If the Brotherhood has truly found a way to open a passage between worlds, we have no proof of that beyond a mad priest's journals and a fanatic's claims," Alexander interrupted, though he knew his objections sounded hollow even to his own years. "Too many pieces aligned too perfectly for coincidence." "Semantics," Liliana dismissed. "The fact remains that Crane has targeted you specifically, has knowledge of your unique bloodline, and believes he can use you to achieve some catastrophic ritual." Her voice hardened. This is precisely why the Covenant has rules about individual vampires acting unilaterally. Your personal vendetta has walked us directly into a trap centuries in the making. This was never about vengeance, Alexander replied, though with less conviction than he might have wished. Wasn't it? Liliana challenged. You could have sent any number of lesser agents to retrieve the Codex. Instead, you insisted on returning personally to the village that tried to destroy you. Your scholarly interest has always been tinged with more personal motivations, Alexander. The Brotherhood merely exploited that predictability. Her assessment stung, precisely because it contained elements of truth. He had returned to Ravenwood partly to confront his past, to understand why the memory of his near destruction there had haunted him, when so many other threats and injuries over the centuries had faded from memory. But that didn't change the current situation, or his responsibility toward Elena, who had helped him twice now at great personal risk. Regardless of how we arrived at this juncture, he said firmly, we have 3 days until the blood moon. Time enough to formulate a strategy that doesn't involve surrendering either the Codex or myself to the Brotherhood. And Elena Petrovna, Lucas asked quietly, what of her fate while you strategize? It was a fair question, one that highlighted the impossible position the Brotherhood had engineered. Every instinct honed over centuries urged caution, consultation with the Covenant, methodical analysis of all options. Yet Elena's life hung in the balance, her peril a direct result of her assistance to Alexander. I gave her my blood, he said slowly, an idea forming. Recently enough that a connection still exists between us. I can sense her location, her condition, provided she remains within a certain radius. Liliana's eyes widened slightly. You would use the blood bond to track her? That's unorthodox. These are unorthodox circumstances, Alexander replied. If I can locate their base of operations, perhaps we can extract Elena before the blood moon, disrupting their plans without falling into their trap. And if their headquarters is heavily guarded, if Crane has prepared for exactly this response, Liliana countered, you cannot seriously believe they would make such an obvious mistake. Not a mistake, Alexander corrected, a calculated risk. They need me alive and cooperative for the ritual. That limits their options significantly. Liliana's expression suggested she remained unconvinced, but she didn't immediately object. Instead, she turned to Lucas. What do these journals say about the ritual itself? What specifically does it require? The priest looked momentarily surprised to be addressed directly by the female vampire, but recovered quickly. Mikhail's notes indicate 3 essential components: the codex containing the incantation, the blood of an evolved vampire willingly shed at the nexus point beneath the church, and the astronomical alignment of the blood moon in Taurus. He hesitated before adding, he also believed the ritual had been attempted before, in previous centuries, but failed due to various circumstances. This attempt would be at least the 4th documented occurrence. Willingly shed, Liliana repeated, focusing on the critical detail. The blood must be given freely. That explains why they've taken hostages rather than simply attempting to capture you. Alexander nodded grimly. They need my cooperation, which gives us a potential advantage. But first, we need to locate Elena and their chapter house. He closed his eyes, focusing on the subtle connection formed by his blood now flowing in Elena's veins. The sensation was faint but discernible, a distant awareness of another life temporarily linked to his own. She lives, he confirmed, after a moment, and she remains relatively near, perhaps 5 miles from the village, to the west. In the mountains, his brow furrowed in concentration. There's pain, but it's controlled. They're keeping her comfortable enough to ensure she remains useful as leverage. The old monastery, Lucas suggested immediately. It's been abandoned for decades, but stands in a defensible position in the western foothills, about 5 miles from here. Local legend claims it was closed after some great scandal, though the details have been lost to time. Or deliberately obscured, Alexander added. It would be a fitting headquarters for the Brotherhood. A corrupted holy site, strategically located yet isolated from casual observation. Liliana paced the small sanctum, her movements betraying unusual agitation. This changes nothing. We should still contact the Covenant immediately. A full contingent of our kind could surround this monastery, overwhelm the Brotherhood's defenses, and extract both Elena and any intelligence about their broader operations. That would take days to organize, Alexander objected. By then, the blood moon will have risen. And a large-scale vampire incursion risks exposing our existence to the wider population, violating the very secrecy the Covenant exists to maintain. So instead, you propose what? A one-vampire assault on a fortress likely prepared specifically to counter your abilities? Liliana's tone dripped with skepticism. Crane has studied our kind for over a century. He knows your tendencies, your capabilities, possibly even your specific weaknesses. I won't be alone, Alexander replied, surprising himself almost as much as Liliana. Liliana stared at him. I have explicit instructions to report to the High Council, not to engage in unsanctioned rescue operations. And yet you came to warn me about Elena's abduction, rather than departing immediately, Alexander observed. Despite your protestations about Covenant protocols, you recognized the urgency of the situation. A flicker of something, perhaps reluctant admiration, crossed Liliana's perfect features before her customary mask of cool detachment returned. The Brotherhood represents a significant enough threat to justify temporary alliance, nothing more. Of course, Alexander agreed, allowing her the pretense. 2 of us stand a better chance than 1, particularly given your personal history with Sebastian Crane. Liliana's expression hardened at the reference. You know nothing about my history with Crane. I know he still lives, when most Brotherhood leaders from his era do not. I know you recognized his name immediately, with a reaction suggesting something beyond professional concern. And I know the Brotherhood's Vienna chapter was supposedly destroyed in 1795, the same period when you were active in that region. For a long moment, Liliana remained silent, her ancient eyes revealing nothing of her thoughts. Finally, she nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Very well. We will attempt to extract Elena from the monastery and gather intelligence on the Brotherhood's plans. But, she raised a finger in warning, we do this with precision and stealth. No heroics, no unnecessary risks, and absolutely no revealing of our true nature to more humans than already know. Agreed, Alexander said, relieved to have secured her cooperation despite the lingering questions about her connection to Crane. Whatever personal history existed between them would have to wait. The immediate priority was Elena's safety and disrupting the Brotherhood's plans. Turning to Lucas, he added, you should remain here, out of sight. If we fail to return by dawn, take whatever precautions you deem necessary for the village's protection. The Brotherhood's focus appears to be on the ritual rather than random destruction, but caution is warranted nonetheless. The priest nodded solemnly. I will pray for your success, though I suspect such sentiments hold little value for beings such as yourselves. Prayer has its place, Alexander replied unexpectedly, but tonight more direct intervention is required. As they prepared to depart, Liliana drew Alexander aside, her voice pitched too low for Lucas to hear. Whatever happens at the monastery, the Codex remains our priority. If we must choose between Elena's life and securing the book, our duty to the Covenant is clear. Alexander met her gaze steadily. Let's ensure such a choice doesn't become necessary. With that, they left the church, moving like shadows through Ravenwood's silent streets toward the western mountains where the abandoned monastery and the Brotherhood of the Eternal Flame awaited. The night embraced them, two immortal predators on a hunting path once more, though whether they were truly the hunters or simply advancing pieces in Sebastian Crane's elaborate game remained to be seen. The journey to the monastery took less than an hour at their preternatural speed, even accounting for the rugged terrain and the caution necessary as they approached what was likely a heavily fortified position. They paused on a ridge overlooking their destination, assessing the situation from a safe distance. The monastery's silhouette stood stark against the night sky, a cluster of stone buildings surrounding a central chapel perched on a plateau with commanding views of the surrounding valleys. Though ostensibly abandoned, subtle signs indicated current occupation. The absence of expected deterioration in key structures, recently cleared pathways between buildings, and most telling, the dim glow of carefully screened lights within the chapel itself. "They've maintained it well," Liliana observed quietly. "This is no temporary outpost, but a permanent installation disguised as ruins." Alexander nodded, extending his senses to their fullest capacity. "I count at least 20 heartbeats within the complex. Most are concentrated in the main buildings, but they've positioned sentries at strategic points around the perimeter." He focused more intently. "And Elena is definitely inside, in the chamber beneath the chapel, if I'm judging the distance correctly." "Appropriate symbolism," Liliana remarked dryly, "keeping their leverage against a vampire imprisoned beneath a house of God." She surveyed the monastery with the tactical assessment of one who had participated in countless conflicts over centuries. The obvious approach would be from the east, where the tree line provides cover almost to the walls, which means it's likely the most heavily guarded and trapped. "Agreed," Alexander replied. "I suggest we split up. You create a distraction at the eastern approach, while I enter from the western cliff face. They'll expect an attempt from the direction of the village, not from the sheer drop behind the monastery." Liliana's expression suggested she found the plan simplistic, but didn't immediately object. "And once inside? The Brotherhood will have prepared countermeasures against our kind. Wards, alchemical compounds, specialized weapons. We adapt as necessary," Alexander said. "The priority is locating Elena and extracting her with minimal confrontation. Secondary objective is intelligence gathering, anything that might reveal the full extent of their plans or capabilities." "And Sebastian Crane?" Liliana asked, a strange intensity in her voice. "What if we encounter him?" Alexander studied her carefully. "Capture, if possible, for interrogation, but not at the expense of the primary objectives." Liliana nodded, though something in her expression suggested she might have her own priorities where Crane was concerned. Before Alexander could press further, she dissolved into the darkness, moving toward the eastern approach as agreed. Left alone, Alexander circled wide around the monastery grounds, approaching the western cliff that dropped hundreds of feet to a rocky ravine below. As he had anticipated, this side of the complex appeared minimally guarded, the Brotherhood relying on natural defenses rather than manpower to secure it. Scaling the sheer rock face was trivial for one with his abilities. Within minutes, he had reached the monastery's outer wall, pausing in its shadow to assess any immediate threats. No heartbeats registered in his immediate vicinity, suggesting this section of the complex was indeed less monitored than the eastern approach. A sudden commotion from the opposite side of the monastery confirmed that Liliana had initiated her diversion. Shouts of alarm and the pounding of feet indicated the majority of the guards were responding to whatever dramatic distraction she had created. Taking advantage of the chaos, Alexander vaulted the wall and moved swiftly through what appeared to have once been kitchen gardens, now repurposed for medicinal herbs and plants with less culinary applications. The scents of wolfsbane, garlic, and more exotic botanicals known for their supposed efficacy against supernatural creatures suggested the Brotherhood maintained their traditional approaches despite their seemingly more scientific understanding of vampire physiology. Reaching the main structure, Alexander paused at a small side door, listening intently. 2 heartbeats remained inside, their rhythm suggesting alertness but not alarm. Guards who had maintained their posts despite the disturbance at the eastern perimeter. Drawing upon centuries of experience in silent elimination of threats, Alexander entered with preternatural speed, incapacitating both guards before they could register his presence. A precise application of pressure to specific points rendered them unconscious without permanent damage, a consideration he would not have bothered with in previous centuries, but which now seemed important for reasons he chose not to examine too closely. With the immediate threats neutralized, he oriented himself toward the chapel, following the pull of his blood connection to Elena. The monastery's layout was typical of its era, long stone corridors connecting functional spaces, all centered around the chapel that formed the spiritual and architectural heart of the complex. As he moved deeper into the structure, Alexander noted subtle modifications to the original design, modern reinforcements disguised to maintain the appearance of age, electrical conduits hidden behind ancient tapestries, and most concerning, a sophisticated alarm system integrated into key doorways. The Brotherhood had transformed the monastery into a fortress without compromising its historical facade. The chapel itself, when he finally reached it, presented a contradiction. Its surface appearance remained that of a traditional Christian sanctuary. Pews facing a simple altar, religious icons adorning the walls, stained glass depicting biblical scenes. But beneath this veneer of orthodoxy, Alexander's enhanced senses detected anomalies. The altar had been subtly repositioned, no longer aligned with the chapel's eastern wall, but with specific celestial coordinates. The floor beneath it had been modified, with barely perceptible seams indicating a concealed entrance to lower levels. And most telling, the chapel's very foundations hummed with a subtle energy, the nexus Michal had written about in his journals. Approaching the altar cautiously, Alexander examined the mechanism concealing the entrance to the lower chambers. It was ingeniously designed to resemble part of the original structure, but showed evidence of frequent recent use. A careful application of strength revealed the triggering mechanism, a pressure plate disguised as a decorative element on the altar's side. The stone floor shifted silently, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The passage was well maintained and showed signs of regular use. Modern lighting fixtures carefully integrated into the ancient stonework, the steps themselves worn smooth by frequent passage. Descending cautiously, alert for traps or guards, Alexander followed the pull of his blood connection to Elena. The stairs led to a network of chambers that predated the monastery itself, perhaps even the Christian presence in the region. The architecture shifted from medieval ecclesiastical to something older, reminiscent of the pre-Christian structures he had observed beneath Ravenwood's church. The similarities were unlikely to be coincidence. Both sites had been built upon nexus points, locations where mystical energies converged for reasons lost to human history, but preserved in certain vampire traditions. The Covenant maintained records of such sites throughout Europe, monitoring them for unusual activities or energetic fluctuations. That the Brotherhood had established bases at 2 such locations within proximity to each other suggested a level of knowledge about supernatural phenomena that few human organizations possessed. It reinforced Alexander's growing concern that Sebastian Crane and his followers represented a far more sophisticated threat than even the Covenant had realized. Following the corridor deeper into the earth, Alexander eventually reached a junction where the passage split in 3 directions. The pull of his blood connection indicated Elena was being held in the leftmost passage. The central corridor hummed with that same subtle energy he had detected in the chapel above, suggesting it led to the heart of the nexus. The right passage bore the distinctive sense of parchment, ink, and leather, likely a repository of some kind. Strategic priorities warred within him. Elena's safety represented his immediate obligation, but intelligence about the Brotherhood's operations and the nature of the ritual they planned might prove equally crucial to preventing whatever catastrophe they sought to unleash. Before he could decide, a voice spoke from the darkness behind him, cultured, measured, with the slight accent of aristocratic German from a previous century. "Alexander Volkov, at last we meet in person. I've waited a very long time for this moment." Turning slowly, Alexander found himself facing an elderly man in a wheelchair, flanked by 2 younger acolytes. Despite his advanced age and apparent physical frailty, the man possessed a commanding presence, his pale blue eyes sharp with intelligence and purpose. Sebastian Crane. The legendary vampire hunter appeared far older than any human should naturally be, his skin like parchment stretched over bone, liver spots marking his hands and face. Yet those eyes remained unnaturally vital, studying Alexander with the clinical interest of a scientist examining a rare specimen. "Sebastian Crane," Alexander acknowledged, his tone neutral despite the surge of wariness the man's presence triggered. "You seem to have expected me." "For decades," Crane confirmed with a thin smile. "Though I admit I anticipated you would come for the codex alone, not for an aging village midwife. Sentiment is an unexpected weakness in one of your lineage." "Where is Elena Petrovna?" Alexander demanded, ignoring the implied criticism. Crane gestured vaguely toward the left passage. "Comfortable for the moment. My followers understand the value of maintaining leverage in negotiable condition." His penetrating gaze never left Alexander's face. "But surely we have more significant matters to discuss than the welfare of a single human life. Matters concerning the Codex Sanguinis, the approaching celestial alignment, and your rather unique bloodline." "I'm aware of your theories regarding a ritual," Alexander replied cautiously, "though I find them difficult to credit. Opening doorways between worlds belongs in fiction, not reality." Crane's laugh was surprisingly robust for one who appeared so frail. "Says the immortal being who drinks blood to survive. The boundaries between fiction and reality have always been more permeable than most dare acknowledge." He wheeled his chair forward slightly, his escorts moving with him like extensions of his will. "But you misunderstand the nature of our work if you believe we seek merely to open a doorway between worlds. Our ambitions are simultaneously more modest and more profound." "Enlighten me then," Alexander suggested, using the conversation to assess potential escape routes and the capabilities of Crane's escorts. Both men were armed with what appeared to be specialized weapons, not conventional firearms, but devices whose purpose Alexander could only guess at. The faint scent of alchemical compounds suggested they were equipped to incapacitate vampires specifically. "We seek transcendence," Crane stated simply. "The evolution of humanity beyond its current limitations, beyond disease, aging, and death itself." He gestured to his withered body. The alchemical extensions to my lifespan are impressive by human standards. I have lived nearly 2 centuries, but they are crude approximations of true immortality. The rituals detailed in the Codex offer something far more significant, the means to transfer the vampiric essence without the corresponding weaknesses. Alexander concealed his shock at this revelation. The concept Crane described was theoretically possible, but had been attempted only a handful of times in vampire history, with universally catastrophic results. The Covenant had banned such research millennia ago after particularly disastrous experiments had resulted in the creation of abominations, neither human nor vampire, but tortured hybrids driven mad by their contradictory nature. If that's your goal, you're pursuing a path already explored and abandoned by my kind, Alexander said carefully. The results were unpredictable. Because your kind lacked the proper catalysts and conditions, Crane countered confidently. The ritual requires specific components that align only rarely. The Codex's incantations, blood from an evolved vampire given willingly at a nexus point, and the precise astronomical alignment that occurs during a blood moon in Taurus. His thin lips curved in a satisfied smile. Conditions that will manifest 3 nights from now, here, in this very chamber. The certainty in Crane's voice was disturbing. Either the man was delusional, or he possessed knowledge that even the Covenant's oldest members had failed to discover. And what makes the Brotherhood's evident resources and Crane's unnaturally extended lifespan, Alexander couldn't dismiss the possibility that he was dealing with a genuine threat rather than a fanatic's fantasy. "And what makes you believe I would willingly participate in such a ritual?" he asked. "Even if your theories prove correct, why would I help create a new race of immortals who would inevitably become competitors for limited resources?" The blackened flesh of his hands had finally healed after 3 decades, but the screams of the villagers still echoed in his mind, their hatred seared into his memory more permanently than the flames had marked his immortal body. Alexander Volkov stared down at the valley where Ravenwood nestled between ancient forests, watching as torch-bearing soldiers surrounded the same square where they had once tried to burn him alive. Now, ironically, he alone possessed the power to save them. Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. The village looked smaller than he remembered, more vulnerable. Thatched roofs clustered around the stone church whose bell had once tolled to announce his execution. Torchlight glinted off armor as Imperial soldiers corralled terrified villagers into the square, separating men from women and children with brutal efficiency. A muscle twitched in his jaw. The irony was not lost on him that the same superstitions that had nearly destroyed him were now threatening the innocent. The Empire's purge of rural villages suspected of harboring supernatural creatures had intensified in recent years, a convenient excuse to subjugate the borderlands and extract resources from vulnerable communities. Alexander adjusted the high collar of his black coat, ensuring it concealed the ritual scars that marked his neck. 30 years was not long enough for rumors to die, especially in isolated places like Ravenwood, where stories were passed down like heirlooms. Some might still remember the mysterious stranger with pale skin and unusual strength, who had arrived seeking ancient texts, only to be denounced by the village priest. His gaze settled on the church. Father Mikhail would be an old man now, if he still lived. The priest had been young and zealous then, quick to condemn what he did not understand. It was his voice that had incited the mob, his hands that had lit the pyre. "They don't deserve your help," came a soft voice from behind him. "I didn't realize I required your approval, Liliana." The female vampire stepped beside him, her crimson dress stark against the moonlit hillside. Unlike Alexander, who cultivated a human appearance, Liliana embraced her predatory nature, pale skin luminescent, eyes like polished garnets, fingernails curved into delicate points. "The Covenant sent me to ensure you weren't planning anything rash," she said, studying the scene below with detached interest. "Interfering in imperial affairs is expressly forbidden, you know this." "I'm aware of the Covenant's rules," Alexander replied coldly. "I'm also aware that the Empire's witch hunters are dangerously close to discovering actual supernatural enclaves. Their commander, General Voss, has acquired knowledge he shouldn't possess." "That's precisely why we cannot draw attention to ourselves," Liliana countered.
The High Council believes. The High Council sits in its marble halls in Vienna, debating philosophy while villages burn, Alexander interrupted. "I've tracked Voss for months. He doesn't seek to eradicate superstition, he's hunting for something specific." Liliana's eyes narrowed. What could he possibly want in this insignificant village? Alexander's gaze returned to the church, its stone spire rising above the humble buildings like an accusing finger pointed at the night sky. "The same thing I sought 30 years ago. Something hidden beneath the church." "The Codex Sanguinis," Liliana breathed, understanding dawning on her perfect features. "You believe it's real? That old legend?" "I know it's real," Alexander replied. "I had found references to its location before the villagers interrupted my search." His scarred hands clenched. "If Voss acquires it, he'll have the means to detect and destroy our kind systematically." Liliana was silent for a moment, weighing this new information against her orders. Finally, she sighed. "The Covenant must be informed. This changes matters." "By then it will be too late," Alexander said. "Voss will have the Codex, and dozens of villagers will be dead, sacrificed to his ambition and the Emperor's paranoia." "And since when does the great Alexander Volkov concern himself with the lives of humans?" Liliana asked, a hint of mockery in her tone. "Particularly ones who tried to destroy him?" Alexander turned to her fully, his pale eyes reflecting the distant torchlight. "Those who condemned me are likely dead or decrepit. Their children and grandchildren shouldn't pay for old sins." "How magnanimous," Liliana remarked dryly. "And what of covenant law? You risk everything, your position, your very existence, for humans who would still fear and hate you if they knew what you were?" "Some rules must be broken to preserve greater principles," Alexander said simply. Liliana studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. "You always were an idealist, even after centuries should have taught you better." She turned away. "I will delay my report to the High Council by 24 hours, no more. Whatever you intend to do it quickly and discreetly." "Your generosity overwhelms me," Alexander replied with a hint of sarcasm. "Don't mistake practicality for generosity," Liliana called over her shoulder as she melted into the shadows. "The Codex in Imperial hands threatens us all. Just remember, no witnesses. If your identity is revealed, even I cannot protect you from the Covenant's judgment." As her presence faded into the night, Alexander returned his attention to the village below. The soldiers had completed their roundup of villagers, and a figure in elaborate uniform was addressing the frightened crowd. Even from this distance, Alexander recognized General Voss.
Tall and imposing, his graying beard neatly trimmed, medals gleaming on his chest. The man's reputation for ruthlessness was well earned. Villages that resisted his investigations often disappeared entirely from maps. Alexander closed his eyes, extending his preternatural senses toward the square. Voss's voice reached him clearly. "Harboring practitioners of dark arts. The Emperor's decree is clear. All suspected witchcraft must be purged. Cooperate, and you may yet save yourselves. Resist." The implied threat hung in the air, punctuated by the frightened whimpers of children. Opening his eyes, Alexander made his decision. 3 decades ago, he had fled Ravenwood. His body burned, his research abandoned, his immortal heart hardened by betrayal. He had sworn never to return. Yet here he stood, preparing once again to walk into danger for the sake of knowledge, and this time for the lives of those who had once condemned him. The irony was not lost on him. With preternatural speed, he descended the hillside, moving between shadows, his black coat billowing behind him like wings. As he approached the village boundary, he slowed to a human pace and adjusted his appearance, subtly altering the pallor of his skin and the sharpness of his features to appear more mortal. No witnesses, Liliana had warned. He would have to be careful, strategic. Save the village without revealing his nature. Retrieve the codex without alerting Voss to its true significance. And perhaps, in the process, exorcise the demons that had haunted him since that night of fire and betrayal 30 years before. At the edge of the village, Alexander paused beside the last house, a small cottage with a sagging roof and shuttered windows. Something about it triggered a memory. An old woman who had tried to warn him all those years ago, who had slipped him a folded note as tensions in the village rose. "They will come for you tonight," it had read. "Flee while you can." He hadn't heeded her warning, confident in his abilities, dismissive of human threats. That arrogance had cost him dearly. A flicker of movement at the cottage window caught his attention. The shutter creaked open slightly, and an eye peered out. Wary, weathered, but somehow familiar. It couldn't be, not after 30 years. The shutter closed quickly, and moments later, the cottage door opened just wide enough for a hunched figure to gesture urgently. Curious despite himself, Alexander approached and slipped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by a small hearth fire that cast long shadows across rough-hewn furniture and bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. The old woman secured the door behind him, then turned, holding a candle up to examine her visitor. Her face was a map of wrinkles, her hair white as snow, but her eyes were sharp and knowing, the same eyes that had once warned him of danger. "Elena Petrovna," Alexander said softly, recognition dawning, "you're still alive." The old woman's face registered shock, then a strange mixture of fear and wonder. "It cannot be," she whispered, her hand trembling so violently that wax dripped onto the floor. You haven't aged a day." "A trick of the light, perhaps," Alexander deflected smoothly. "It has been many years." 30 years, Elena said, her eyes never leaving his face. 30 years since they burned you in the square. I saw your body consumed by flames. No man could survive that." "Clearly you were mistaken," Alexander replied, his tone hardening slightly. "I escaped with injuries and fled." Elena's expression suggested she didn't believe him, but she seemed to accept that pursuing the truth was less important than current dangers. "You've chosen a perilous time to return, Alexander Volkov. The Emperor's witch hunters have sealed the village. No one enters or leaves."